the Toronto Star. I'm Saba Itazaz, and this matters. After more than a year of pandemic anxiety, lockdowns, wrestling with work from home, and your kids' online learning at the same time, for the GTA, tomorrow is finally the first day of school. Many of you might be sharing in your child's excitement the flurry of packing lunches and school bags, but there are some who will also be sharing their child's disappointment at being left out once again. Some parents of children with special needs and complicated medical conditions are feeling abandoned after being told their child might not be able to return to class because there are not enough nurses to care for them. These are the kids who have missed out on a lot of the routine they need in their life after a tough year and after an online learning system that also didn't prioritize their special needs and unique challenges. Many parents have been struggling with and talking about that since last year. The pandemic has amplified the nurse shortage, but once again, this is only part of the issue, which is actually rooted in systemic neglect and lack of resources in the care sector that ends up excluding children from the social and educational system when they're in need of it the most. Omar Mosleh wrote about this for The Star, and he's here now to explain. Hi, Omar. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So it seems like school is reopening, but some children might not get to go. Can you talk to me about why that is?
Yeah, so I'm being told by parents of medically fragile children. So these are kids who need 24/7 support from a nurse because their conditions either require them to be on something like an IV for food or a breathing tube or their medication. They have to have their vital signs checked right after. So they need a nurse. And what they're being told is that there's just not enough nurses to go around for their kids who need this in the class for the whole day.
When we're talking about medically fragile children, you also mentioned some of their special needs for when they go to school. What kind of health problems are we generally talking about here?
There's a whole host of conditions. It can really be anything that where the kid requires a nurse 24/7. So some of the ones I've come across are cerebral palsy, when the kids need their vital signs checked every 6 hours. Another example is spinal muscular atrophy, when they have weak muscles which require them to either be in a wheelchair or to have assistance from a nurse, mobility. So yeah, basically the main thing is that they need 24/7 support from a nurse, which is sometimes seemingly now harder and harder to get.
Let's look a little bit closely at what you're talking about here through an example, because you talk about a few parents who are concerned and some children in your piece as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about Malik and what kind of challenges are him and his family up against?
Sure. So Malik has several conditions that affect his ability to eat and breathe independently. He's also autistic, which means that the classroom is really crucial for him. Like virtual learning doesn't work for him. He has a very rare genetic condition called CHARGE syndrome, which is very complex. And, I can't really pretend that I can explain it adequately. But what I do know is that it does affect his ability to breathe and feed independently. So he has an IV tube, and he's also deaf or hearing impaired. So he has a number of challenges where he really needs a nurse with him 24/7. He actually needs 2-to-1 care. So yeah, it's very challenging. And, the idea of this kid just sitting at home and doing virtual learning, his mom says that's just not going to work for him.
Yeah, I was thinking that it would probably have been difficult all this time away from school with all of these challenges because remote learning came with its own difficulties, right?
Absolutely.
So what is he up against as he prepares for a return to school after more than a year? Like, what kind of barriers in the system is he facing? What are the options for his parents at this point?
I'm being told there are very few options or none really. So he hasn't been in school since January 2020. At first it was because of an infection that he had to get hospitalized for, and then school shut down. This is really affecting his development because, with autism and being hearing impaired, he really needs the sign language instruction in the class, and he needs that physical interaction, with other kids and the teacher. So, right now he's losing out on a lot of services like therapy and sign language instruction. His mom trying to help with that by getting their home care nurses to instruct to some level, but it's not what he would get in school. So in addition to not getting his, regular academic instruction, his development is also being affected. And right now his mom says, well, the only option is for me to wait until they find a nurse, which with every passing day is more stressful and frustrating for her.
We'll be right back. And I think you mentioned this in your piece as well about the home care nurses. And also, there's some kind of a loophole where those contracts cannot be expanded and those same nurses cannot be utilized for school, right?
Yes. So this is where the complexity of Ontario's healthcare system really shows, because the way it works is the school boards don't actually have their own nurses. So the school boards work with home and community care support services, of which there are several branches throughout the province. And then they have the home care nursing agencies. So all these three partners work together to get the home care nurses from the agencies into the classroom. So it seems, I've been told there's a lack of integration, lack of coordination, but it seems like there's also just a lack of nurses, to be blunt.
Right. And you speaking of a lack of nurses, why is there this nursing shortage? Is it because of the pandemic? Was it an ongoing issue and the pandemic heightened it? What's going on?
I've been told it's a systemic issue. I've been told it's just it's been a problem in Ontario. It's been a longstanding issue, but certainly the pandemic brought it to a point where it was simply untenable. I think anyone who's followed long-term care homes and the issues we've seen with those in the province, it's pretty clear there's issues with nursing staffing levels. It's particularly with registered nurses. So the way this works is with these home care agencies, registered nurse can work wherever they want. And I'm told the home care agencies are not nearly as robust in what they offer as hospitals. So you get less pay, fewer hours, not as many benefits. So nurses generally would prefer to work in a hospital. So the home care agencies are seeing the real deficit because the nurses would rather work in hospitals, understandably so.
And that leads to a lack of inclusion in Ontario's education system as well for kids like Malik, right?
Yeah, that's what parents are telling me.
So, did the Ontario government come up with a standardized plan to address these problems when they started coming up at first, which was a while back? Or has it just kind of been left to parents and individual school boards to figure out?
Well, they tell me they're investing into nursing. But in terms of like the coordination between the school board and the province and formerly LINS, it does seem like there's some kind of gap there. Because otherwise we wouldn't be in this situation where parents are being told, sorry, there's no nurse for you, despite them having pleaded with the local home and community care support services for months. So yeah, they did announce, I believe it was 61 million, and includes hiring new nurses, but also helping them get into programs at colleges and universities that are publicly funded by the province. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but the province says it's really committed to, fixing this problem. And I guess we have to wait and see how long that'll take.
And this has been a recent announcement, but this seems to be a running theme in Ontario during this pandemic. I remember even last year, parents and advocates were raising concerns about a lack of guidelines or accommodation for children with special needs. The same problems were there during the remote learning phase. A year later, despite the announcement, it seems like nothing significant has been changed. Is that what parents and advocates have been telling you?
Yes. Parents have told me that, this has always been a challenge, but the pandemic has brought it to another level. Like my main source tells me, while, we would frequently have to wait or, we would learn that the nurse is available just before school reopens. I've never been in a situation where they told me, we just do not have a nurse. So it seems like with, the staffing challenges that the pandemic has presented, it's reached a point where it's not sustainable anymore.
So, what are these parents going to do next? Because school opening dates are just around the corner. So, are they just talking about keeping their children home once more?
That's what some of them are looking at. My main source and her son, Malik, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to attend school when it opens. So, yeah, she has to look at, providing as much services as she can at home, maybe some form of virtual learning. But as she mentioned, it just doesn't really work for him. So they consider it a pretty dire situation. They're really frustrated and stressed and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. And yeah, it's just kind of really unfortunate to hear these stories.
And given that we saw how this pandemic has disproportionately affected people living with disabilities and those with special needs, like you said, this must be exceptionally disappointing for parents. How important is it for children like Malik to get back to school and have that kind of routine, socialize after the challenge of being in isolation for so long?
I would say it's critical, especially for a child like Malik who is on the autism spectrum. It's so important for him to have that routine. So, change can be difficult for them to adjust to. It's really important for him to have that socialization, to be able to interact and just to get out of the house. Like I can't imagine what it's like. I think we can all relate to some extent, but when you're a little needs that support, it's going to affect you much more drastically. So I would imagine that every passing day, his development is being affected. Mental health is huge for kids we know at that age. He's 12. So, depression, anxiety, these things are all manifesting, I would imagine, in his life to some extent.
Well, thank you so much for explaining the issue and for your time, Omar.
Thanks, I appreciate you guys having me on.
I was talking to Omar Mosleh. He's a reporter for the Toronto Star based in Edmonton. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Sabai Tazaz. The This Matters team is Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bucknick, Raju Mutter, and Sean Pattenton. Our music is by So-Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenton. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribingmatters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.